The city of London, swathed in the early evening mist, stood still under a clouded sky. The towering buildings, their windows reflecting the dim light of the setting sun, seemed to exude an air of mystery. In every corner, every alley, there was a hint of something dark and unfathomable lurking just beneath the surface. Like the fleeting shadows that played across the cobbled streets, it was on such an evening that a crime of dreadful magnitude occurred, forever altering the delicate balance of power, wealth, and secrecy that so often defines the lives of the city's elite. The call had come in an hour earlier, a voice trembling. At the other end of the line, a voice that spoke of a brutal death in Lord Hamilton's estate, one of the grandest mansions nestled just outside the heart of London, at the end of a long winding road lined with ancient oaks. The estate had long been a symbol of grandeur with its ornate gates, tall iron fences, and expansive gardens, a place where wealth and privilege were carefully guarded behind closed doors. Yet tonight, the towering mansion had become the scene of a tragedy. Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian detective known for his meticulous mind and his obsession with order, arrived at the scene swiftly. His black polished shoes clicked sharply on the gravel driveway as he approached the mansion's front steps. The night air carried a chill, but Poirot felt neither the cold nor the weight of the night. His mind was already at work, searching for patterns, for clues, for the things others might overlook. The estate was silent as Poirot made his way through the front doors, his sharp eyes scanning the house, though vast and impressive, held an air of stagnation that only the wealthy can cultivate. The marble floors were impeccably polished, the paintings that adorned the walls gleamed in the low light. But something was off. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, an unsettling calm that hinted at something sinister. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath. The body had been discovered in Lord Hamilton's study, a room that exuded an air of quiet refinement. Tall shelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound books that spoke of power, history, and influence. The faint scent of tobacco lingered in the air. The heavy leather chair by the large oak desk still rocked gently as if recently vacated. The body of Lord Reginald Hamilton, the victim, lay sprawled out on the rich Persian rug in front of his desk. He was a man of imposing stature, a man whose presence was both commanding and calculating. Now he lay dead, his lifeless eyes staring up at the intricate ceiling above, as if seeking some form of justice or truth that would never come. Poirot crouched beside the body, his eyes narrowing with precision. He observed everything, the stillness of the room, the faintest disturbance in the papers scattered across the desk. His gloved fingers brushed the edge of the chair where Lord Hamilton had likely been sitting, studying something before the fatal blow. His sharp mind began to process the scene, the manner of death, the position of the body, the layout of the room. Everything had a purpose, even in chaos. The room seemed to whisper secrets as Poirot took in the details. A shattered glass of red wine rested by the edge of the desk, its contents spilled across the surface in a slow trickle, the deep red staining the wood beneath it. The spilled liquid was strangely perfect, as though it had been poured with care, as though it had a particular destination in mind. Beside it, the wine bottle, still half full, lay untouched. Poirot's gaze shifted to the victim's hands. They were open, almost as if Lord Hamilton had been in the middle of a conversation when the attack had occurred. Something else caught his attention, the slight indentation of a wax seal, crushed beneath the victim's body. Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed further. The seal was broken, but its design, a small yet intricate insignia of a serpent coiled around a dagger, was unmistakable. It was a symbol he had seen before, but it did not belong to any house, family, or institution he knew of. It was something personal, something hidden. Poirot's mind began to turn over the details. He could see the scene with perfect clarity. Lord Hamilton, a man of great wealth and power, had been struck down in his own home, in his most private space. There had been no sign of forced entry. There was no obvious struggle, no indication that the victim had fought for his life. The doors had been locked from the inside, the windows securely closed, yet somehow, someone had gained access to the study and murdered the man. Poirot stood up, casting a final glance at the room before turning to Detective Inspector Gerald Blake, who had been standing at the doorway, awaiting instructions. "Ah, Inspector Blake," Poirot said in his usual calm, measured voice. "We have much to discuss." Nestle Blake, a stout man with a furrowed brow, nodded gravely. "The murder is as perplexing as it is horrifying, Poirot. There are no signs of a struggle. It seems to have been an execution of some kind. And yet, ... And yet, the seal," interjected, his eyes glinting with understanding. "Tell me, Inspector, What do we know about the seal? Blake shifted uncomfortably. It's strange. The seal, well, it's a unique mark, but we've not been able to find any references to it. No family, no society, no organization, at least none that we know of. Poirot studied the detective's face, reading his every expression. The uncertainty was palpable. He could see Blake's frustration, his attempts to impose order on something that did not yet make sense. Poirot paused, allowing the silence to fill the room. There is no doubt in my mind, Inspector, that this seal is crucial to understanding the truth of Lord Hamilton's death. Do you think it was the motive? Blake asked, his voice low, as though fearful of the answer. Poirot turned to him, his gaze unwavering. No, Inspector, the motive lies elsewhere. The seal, ... It is the first clue. But we must not rush to conclusions. We must examine every detail, every person, and every possible connection. Only then will we know the full story. As Poirot spoke, he could already sense the growing web of intrigue and deceit that surrounded Lord Hamilton's death. There were many questions to answer. Who would want Lord Hamilton dead? Who would benefit from his untimely demise? What secrets had he been hiding? And most importantly, what was the true significance of the broken seal? Poirot turned to face the room once more, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to take shape. He could feel the tension in the air. Each second seemed to stretch into eternity, each moment bringing him closer to the truth, yet further from the answers he sought. As he walked toward the desk, his eyes scanning every detail with painstaking care, a feeling of certainty washed over him. The investigation had only just begun, but Hercule Poirot knew one thing for certain: the truth was somewhere within this room, hidden in plain sight, waiting for him to uncover it. The first clue had been found. Now the game was afoot. The next morning, the grand estate of Lord Reginald Hamilton was once again filled with the hum of life, though that hum was now laced with an underlying tension. The servants, usually so meticulous in their duties, moved about quietly, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously from one corner of the house to another. Even the most mundane tasks, polishing silver, dusting chandeliers, arranging flowers, seemed to carry with them an air of unease. The grand estate, once a symbol of elegance and prestige, now felt like a haunted place, shadowed by the brutal murder that had occurred under its roof the night before. At the center of it all stood Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective, with the extraordinary mind, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The estate had been cordoned off by the police, but Poirot had insisted on continuing his own investigation, for he knew that the truth was always hidden in the smallest of details. The things that others would overlook. Poirot stood in the study once more, his gaze fixed on the broken wax seal that had been the first clue. The letter, still open on the desk, seemed to hold a secret that had cost Lord Hamilton his life. But to understand the full story, Poirot knew that he needed to dig deeper, to question those who had known the victim, and to uncover the hidden motives that may have led to this heinous crime. The first suspects, Lady Isabel and John Poirot's first stop, was the drawing room, where he had requested to speak with Lady Isabel Hamilton, the victim's wife. Lady Isabel was a striking woman, her beauty matched only by her aloofness. She sat in a chair by the window, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her face as composed as ever, but Poirot noticed the subtle signs of tension in her, the way her fingers twitched occasionally, as if longing for a cigarette, the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke, despite her attempt to maintain her composure. Lady Isabel seemed to be a woman on the edge. Madame Hamilton, Poirot began, his voice smooth, but insistent. I understand this is a difficult time for you, but I must ask, where were you last evening? Lady Isabel's gaze flickered, and for a brief moment, Poirot could see a flicker of something dark in her eyes. She quickly regained her calm demeanor and answered, I was in my room. I retired early last night. I had a headache, and I thought it best to rest. Poirot studied her face intently. The alibi seemed plausible, but the hesitation in her voice was undeniable. She was hiding something, perhaps a small detail, something seemingly insignificant, but Poirot knew that it was those very details that often led to the truth. I see, Poirot said thoughtfully, moving closer to the large marble fireplace where Lady Isabel's gaze had been fixed. And did you hear anything unusual? Did you see anyone come or go from the study last night? Lady Isabel stiffened at this question, her eyes narrowing slightly. No, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Poirot nodded, taking a mental note of her response. He could sense that there was more to Lady Isabel than she was letting on. Her cool exterior was betraying the stress that she was no doubt under, but he could not yet put his finger on why she seemed so uncomfortable. After a moment of silence, Poirot asked, "I understand you and your husband had a rather complicated relationship. Is that true?" Lady Isabel's expression darkened for a fleeting moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Complicated? I suppose you could say that. Reginald was a very driven man. Sometimes his work consumed him, but that does not mean I would wish him harm. I loved him." Poirot studied her reaction carefully, his gaze unflinching. There was something in her words, something in her voice that didn't ring entirely true, but Poirot chose not to press her further. Not yet. There was time for that later. Next, Poirot moved on to speak with John, the butler, who had been in the employ of the Hamilton family for over 20 years. John was a man of few words, a constant fixture in the household, and one who, it seemed, had been present at every important moment of Lord Hamilton's life. His presence at the scene of the crime was both expected and unsettling. After all, a servant so deeply embedded in the household could be the perfect person to carry out such a deed. If there were a motive, Poirot found John in the small servants' quarters at the back of the house, standing by the window and gazing out into the misty garden. His posture was stiff, and his face, usually expressionless, seemed drawn, his eyes shadowed by something unreadable. "Ah, Monsieur John, I trust you are well?" Poirot asked, his voice light and cordial, though his eyes were keen. John turned to face the detective, his movements deliberate, his expression unreadable. "I am fine, Monsieur Poirot, as fine as one can be under the circumstances." "I must ask you," John Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing, "where were you last night, at the time of Lord Hamilton's death?" John hesitated, a slight shift in his eyes betraying his thoughts. "I was in my quarters, monsieur. I had finished my duties for the evening and retired early. I didn't hear anything." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "You did not hear anything? Not even a noise coming from the study?" John's eyes flickered. "No, nothing at all." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze never leaving the butler's face. "And yet, you were in the house for many years, serving the Hamilton family. Did you not have a special relationship with Lord Hamilton?" John's lips pressed into a thin line. "I have always been loyal to the family, monsieur. There is nothing more to say." Poirot regarded him carefully. The butler's defense was solid, but the detective could feel a slight tension in the man's demeanor. It was subtle, but Poirot's mind was already piecing together the threads of suspicion. The butler's answer had been too swift, too practiced. "Very well, John, thank you for your time," Poirot said, though his mind was far from satisfied. There was something the butler wasn't saying, something lurking just beneath the surface, but it would take more than one conversation to crack him open. The first lead. Financial motives. Poirot's next step was to investigate Lord Hamilton's personal affairs. The victim had been known as a shrewd businessman, deeply involved in various ventures, but there were whispers, quiet whispers, that his financial situation had not been as stable as it appeared. Poirot spent hours in Lord Hamilton's study, going through the man's ledgers, correspondence, and bank statements. It was there that he uncovered the first significant lead, a series of transactions to a mysterious company. The payments were large, consistent, and suspiciously vague, lacking any details about the purpose of the funds. The payments appeared to have been made over several months, but there was no explanation for them in the victim's official records. Who was receiving these payments? And why had Lord Hamilton chosen to keep such transactions hidden? Poirot's thoughts raced. This was no ordinary financial issue. The payments had the hallmarks of something far more sinister, perhaps a payoff, or a bribe. But to whom was Lord Hamilton paying, and why? Poirot knew one thing for sure. The motive for this murder was likely tied to money, and the mysterious company was at the center of it all. But the connections were still elusive. Like a maze with no clear exit, a web of suspicion unfolds as Poirot continued his investigation. The web of suspicion grew larger. Victor Carlyle, a longtime family friend of the Hamiltons, was another key figure in the mystery. Carlyle had been an associate of Lord Hamilton for years, but his behavior during the investigation was curious. Poirot had observed him during the questioning, noting his calm exterior and his almost too precise answers. Was he hiding something, or was he simply a man of impeccable self-control? Poirot also learned that Lady Isabel and Victor had once shared a brief affair, something that the family had tried to keep hidden for years. Was it possible that Victor had been involved in the murder, motivated by jealousy, or even fear of Lord Hamilton's plan to expose their relationship? As questions dug deeper, a more complex picture began to form. Everyone had a motive. It seemed Lady Isabel with her unhappy marriage, John with his long history at the estate, and Victor Carlyle with his secrets and ties to the victim's past. But was there a common thread that connected them all? The detective's mind swirled with possibilities. Poirot was no stranger to deception, but this case felt different. There was something darker, more intricate at play. The answers were not going to be easy to find. But Poirot was resolute. He had uncovered the first clue, and now the investigation would continue, step by careful step, until the truth was revealed. The morning sun had barely pierced through the thick clouds of London when Hercule Poirot once again arrived at Lord Hamilton's estate, his sharp mind already formulating new theories as he approached the grand house. Each step on the gravel path seemed to echo the growing complexity of the case that he had taken on. The more he investigated, the more layers of deception he uncovered. The suspects, seemingly simple enough at first glance, had begun to reveal themselves as something far more enigmatic. Poirot had spent the past few days quietly observing, listening, and noting down every minute detail. His trained eye could see through the masks of civility and pretense that each person wore. There were lies. He knew small lies and big ones, and those lies had a way of unraveling the truth. It was only a matter of time before they began to fall apart. The first lie, Lady Isabel's alibi. Lady Isabel Hamilton's alibi had been one of the first things Poirot questioned. She had claimed to be resting in her room, away from the crime scene when Lord Hamilton was killed. But after further examination, Poirot had his doubts. The inconsistencies were small, almost imperceptible, but they were there. Poirot had returned to her room on the second floor. The walls, painted in soft tones of lavender, were lined with portraits of Hamilton ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow him as he walked. The room itself was impeccably arranged, but there was one detail that caught Poirot's attention. The window was slightly open, a subtle crack, just wide enough to let in the evening breeze. The wind had been calm the night of the murder, but an open window was an odd choice for someone who claimed to be resting indoors. Poirot turned to Lady Isabel as she sat before a mirror, running a brush through her hair with exaggerated care. Her nervousness was palpable, but she maintained her poise, her chin raised slightly as she studied herself in the mirror. Madame, Poirot said gently, "May I ask you once again, were you certain you heard nothing last night? No unusual sounds, no footsteps outside your door?" Her fingers faltered slightly, the brush pausing mid-stroke. "I heard nothing, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Poirot's gaze remained focused on her, not giving her the comfort of an easy escape. "You are certain, because I must tell you, I discovered something strange. The window in your room, it was slightly open. Could it be that you were out of your room after all? Perhaps you heard something and thought it best to keep silent." Lady Isabel's expression hardened for a moment, and her lips pressed into a tight line. "I don't know what you're suggesting, but I had nothing to do with my husband's death," she replied, her voice rising with indignation. Poirot said nothing for a moment, allowing the silence to fill the room. He observed her closely. The defense was strong, but there was a crack in her story, one he could not ignore. The second lie. John the butler. Poirot's next visit took him to the kitchen, where John the butler had been overseeing the preparation of tea for the household. John had been a loyal servant for over 2 decades, and while he appeared trustworthy, Poirot had learned that loyalty could easily turn into something darker when mixed with personal interests and long-hidden grievances. John was in his usual place by the stove, his back turned as he stirred the pot. The room was warm and fragrant, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Yet, as Poirot entered, the atmosphere seemed stifling, as though the warmth had suddenly become oppressive. "Monsieur John," Poirot said, his voice casual, but with an edge that indicated a deeper intent. "You were in your quarters last night, were you not?" John did not immediately answer, his hands slowing their movements. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot," he said at last. "I retired early, just as I said before." Poirot's sharp eyes flicked toward a small table in the corner of the room, where a stack of letters had been placed. Among them was a letter with the Hamilton family crest stamped on the envelope. It had been opened, but the contents appeared hastily placed back inside. Poirot picked up the letter and examined it with a keen eye. "This letter, Monsieur John, it appears to have been opened rather carelessly, don't you think? Is it possible you received something last night?" John's eyes darted to the letter in Poirot's hand. For the briefest moment, he looked unsure of himself. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, though his voice was calm. Poirot smiled slightly, noting the man's discomfort. But I believe you do know. This letter, it was addressed to Lord Hamilton, was it not?" John's face twitched. "Yes, it was, monsieur, but that's not unusual. I handle Lord Hamilton's correspondence daily." "Then why was it left here, unsealed, and handled so carelessly?" Poirot pressed. It seems odd, does it not? John's expression hardened. I don't know why you're bringing this up, Monsieur Poirot. I had nothing to do with Lord Hamilton's death. Poirot unfazed, let the silence hang in the air. His suspicion deepened. John's story didn't add up, and the letter, though seemingly insignificant, was a key piece in unraveling the mystery. Had John opened the letter in secret, perhaps with an intent to hide something? Poirot wasn't sure yet, but he would find out. The third lie, Victor Carlyle. Victor Carlyle had been a close family friend of the Hamiltons for years, and he had attended many of the high society gatherings held at the estate. He was a man of impeccable manners, a socialite with a sharp mind and a taste for intrigue. On the surface, he seemed charming, almost too perfect, but as Poirot delved deeper into the investigation, he began to sense a darker undercurrent in Carlyle's demeanor. Victor Carlyle had a strong alibi. He had been seen at a local club the night of the murder by several individuals who vouched for his whereabouts, but Poirot was not one to accept things at face value. Alibis were often the easiest lies to construct, and Poirot suspected that Carlyle might be hiding something far more sinister. Poirot arranged to meet Victor in the library, a vast room with dark wood paneling and towering shelves crammed with volumes on every subject imaginable. Carlyle was already there, seated comfortably by a roaring fire, a glass of scotch in hand. His posture was relaxed, and his smile seemed perfectly rehearsed. Monsieur Poirot, Carlyle greeted him smoothly, rising to shake the detective's hand. I trust you're enjoying your investigation. I must say, it's quite a spectacle, isn't it? Poirot smiled faintly, but his eyes never left Carlyle's. Indeed, monsieur, a spectacle indeed. But I must ask you once again, where were you last night? You claim to have been at the club, but I find it strange that you were not concerned for Lady Isabel during such a tragic event. A man of your position, your connections, would it not be expected of you to offer your support? Carlyle's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before he replied, Of course I offered my support, but as you know, the matter of Lord Hamilton's death has already been handled. There is nothing more to discuss. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze intense. But is there not, Monsieur Carlyle? The connection between you and Lady Isabel, I understand that there was more than just friendship between you. Perhaps you had more to gain from Lord Hamilton's death than anyone else. Carlyle's face flushed, his carefully constructed facade cracking. For a moment Poirot saw a flicker of something guilt or fear cross Carlyle's features, but it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. I have no idea what you're insinuating, Carlyle said coolly, his voice returning to its calm, collected tone. I was nowhere near Lord Hamilton's study, and if I may remind you, I have already been cleared of any suspicion. Poirot's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. Ah, but monsieur, it is not about what you have already been cleared of. It is about what you have not yet been questioned about. Your past, your ties to the Hamiltons. It is all part of the puzzle, and I intend to find out the truth, no matter how many lies you weave. Victor Carlyle stiffened, his smile fading. Completely. You'll find nothing, Poirot, nothing at all. Poirot rose slowly, his mind wary with the new revelations. Victor Carlyle had a dark secret, something far deeper than a mere affair with Lady Isabel. But what was it, and how did it relate to Lord Hamilton's death? The web tightens as Poirot left the library. His mind continued to churn. The lies of Lady Isabel, John the butler, and Victor Carlyle were growing increasingly entangled, each one covering for the other, each one trying to protect something far darker than a simple murder. But Poirot knew the truth was not far behind. He just needed to continue pulling at the threads, patiently and carefully. There was more to this case than anyone had realized. The broken seal, the mysterious company, the hidden relationships, everything was starting to connect. But who was behind the murder? Who stood to gain the most from Lord Hamilton's untimely death? Poirot had no answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This was a case of deception on an unparalleled scale, and he would uncover every lie, no matter how deep it was buried. The investigation was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The days after Hercule Poirot's initial interviews were like the slow ticking of a clock, each second crawling past him, each detail sliding into place with agonizing slowness. But Poirot knew that every great mystery required patience. His instincts told him that the first major breakthrough was close. He could feel it in the air, like the calm before a storm. And so, with an air of quiet determination, he pressed on, examining every scrap of evidence, listening carefully to every conversation, and analyzing the smallest of gestures. But it wasn't until late one evening, as Poirot was revisiting the study, that his persistence finally bore fruit. It had been an unremarkable day in terms of new evidence, yet Poirot could not shake the feeling that something important had been overlooked. He had already interviewed the suspects, scrutinized the victim's personal life, and pieced together the various alibis and motives, and yet one detail nagged at him: the broken wax seal. The first clue he had found at the scene of the crime. The seal had always been the most enigmatic part of the puzzle. What did it mean? Why was it the first clue Poirot had discovered? The serpent coiled around the dagger, an intricate insignia he had seen once before, held an eerie significance, one that Poirot could not quite place. What was its connection to Lord Hamilton's murder? Poirot had come to believe that the answer lay hidden within the study itself, perhaps in a place no one had thought to look. The study had been thoroughly examined by the police, but Poirot's eyes were sharper than any officer's, and he was certain there was something more. He had already searched the desk, the bookshelves, and the drawers, but this time Poirot was drawn to the furniture in a way that felt different, more deliberate. His gaze fell on the vintage armchair by the fire, its back slightly tilted, as if someone had been sitting there recently. Lord Hamilton had been found near his desk, but had he ever sat in that chair? Was there something about it that had been overlooked? Poirot approached the chair, running his fingers over the wooden armrests and the rich upholstery. He bent down, inspecting the area around the seat with his usual precision. His fingers traced the contours of the fabric and then stopped abruptly, when he felt something solid beneath it. With a quiet tug, he lifted the cushion. There, hidden beneath the plush seat, was a small leather-bound journal. The journal was surprisingly light, and it looked as if it had been placed there in a hurry. Poirot's fingers brushed across the cover, but the journal's contents were not immediately accessible. It had a metal clasp, which Poirot deftly unlocked. His heart quickened as he opened the first page, his eyes scanning the handwriting inside. The journal was filled with Lord Hamilton's private thoughts, observations, and details about his business dealings. But what immediately caught Poirot's attention was the final entry. It was dated the night before the murder. The seal has been broken. Tonight I meet with the one who holds the key to everything. I must uncover the truth before it is too late. Poirot's mind raced. The seal, the very same seal that had been found broken at the scene of the crime, was referenced here, just hours before Lord Hamilton's death. But what did it mean? Who was this mysterious figure that Lord Hamilton intended to meet, and why had the man waited until the night before the murder to act? Poirot quickly leafed through the rest of the journal, but there was little else of significance. The entries were all routine, filled with business notes, personal reflections, and references to various meetings, but nothing that offered any clue about the identity of the person Lord Hamilton had intended to meet. Yet, it was clear that the discovery of the seal had been a turning point for him, a revelation, a secret, something that had driven him to seek out this mysterious individual. Poirot closed the journal with a quiet snap, his mind already running through possibilities. The journal was important, no doubt, but it raised more questions than answers. Still, it was a significant lead, the first substantial clue that pointed to the reason behind Lord Hamilton's murder. It was clear now that someone had been willing to kill to protect whatever secret Lord Hamilton had uncovered. But who and why? The hidden connection, the mysterious visitor, the discovery of the journal changed everything. It provided Poirot with a new theory to explore. The seal, the same one found at the crime scene, wasn't just an object of curiosity. It was the key to understanding the victim's death. The seal had been broken, and Lord Hamilton had been seeking someone, the individual who held the answers, someone who could explain the significance of the symbol. This person, Poirot reasoned, must have been important enough to drive Lord Hamilton to meet them at any cost. It was no coincidence that this meeting had taken place the night before the murder. Poirot spent the following day revisiting every witness, every suspect, in search of a connection. He started with Lady Isabel, who had been strangely evasive. During their last conversation, she had denied knowing anything about the seal, but could she have been hiding something more? When Poirot arrived at Lady Isabel's private sitting room, she was sitting by the window, gazing out into the overcast morning. The silence in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Her fingers rested lightly on the windowsill, but her eyes were fixed on the garden outside, as if searching for something far beyond the view. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Isabel said, her voice soft yet firm, "I believe you have come to ask me more questions." Poirot's gaze softened. "Madame, I believe we have much more to discuss. You mentioned that your husband was a very private man, a man who kept secrets. But I must ask you, did he ever speak to you about the seal?" Lady Isabel stiffened slightly, her hand tightening on the windowsill. For a moment her expression betrayed a flicker of fear, but it vanished almost as quickly as it had come. "The seal," she repeated, her voice strained. "What do you mean, monsieur? I don't understand your question." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You see, madame, I believe Lord Hamilton was planning to meet with someone very important. He had been investigating something, and he had made a discovery that led him to this individual. He wrote in his journal that the seal had been broken, and he was determined to meet with this person to uncover the truth." Lady Isabel's expression remained unchanged, but Poirot could tell that something in her had shifted. She was no longer speaking with the calm composure she had before. The walls were starting to crack. "You are mistaken, Monsieur Poirot," she said with a hint of desperation in her voice. "My husband, he was an honorable man. He would never involve himself in such matters. If there was someone who held power over him, I would have known about it." Poirot's gaze softened, but his words were firm. "Madame, I believe your husband trusted you less than you realize, and I also believe he was trying to protect you from something that was too dangerous for him to reveal. The seal was not just a symbol, it was a warning." Lady Isabel remained silent, her lips trembling slightly as she fought to maintain her composure. Poirot could see that he was reaching her, but she was reluctant to speak further. There was fear in her eyes, fear of a truth she was unwilling to face. Poirot paused, his mind working through the possibilities. "Madame, I will leave you to think, but I must tell you this, the truth is closer than you think. The man your husband sought was not someone from his past. No, madame, he was someone closer than you realize. And when the truth comes to light, you may not like what you see." The web widens, an unexpected visitor that evening. Poirot received an unexpected visit from Detective Inspector Blake. The inspector had been a steady presence during the investigation, but he was now looking increasingly weary. He had always followed Poirot's lead, but something in his demeanor suggested that he, too, was beginning to feel the pressure of the case. "Poirot," Blake said as he entered Poirot's study, his voice low and urgent. "I've just come from the police station. We've made a discovery. One of the servants has come forward with information." Poirot looked up sharply. "A servant?" "Yes," Blake confirmed. "One of the maids, the new one, by the name of Eliza, claims she saw something the night of the murder. She says she saw Lord Hamilton speaking to a man outside the estate, a man she didn't recognize. She says it was shortly before the murder took place." Poirot's mind whirred with excitement. This was it, the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Someone had seen Lord Hamilton meeting with a mysterious individual. The connection was finally forming. The seal, the broken trust, and now the mysterious visitor. Poirot stood up, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Inspector Blake, we must find this man. We must learn who he is, and why Lord Hamilton was meeting with him. It is clear now that this meeting held the key to the mystery." Blake nodded gravely. "I'll have the maid brought in immediately." Poirot's mind raced. Everything was starting to come together. The journal, the broken seal, the mysterious visitor, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. Lord Hamilton had been seeking something dangerous, something that had ultimately led to his death. But what was it? And more importantly, who stood to gain from his untimely demise? As Poirot awaited the arrival of the maid, he knew one thing for certain. The answers were within reach, and soon, the mystery would be revealed. The morning after the startling revelation about Lord Hamilton's final meeting with a mysterious figure, Hercule Poirot woke early, his mind still buzzing with the possibilities. The discovery of the hidden journal had opened new doors, but, with each door he opened, more questions emerged. The puzzle pieces were coming together, yet the final picture was still elusive. The discovery of a witness, Eliza, the maid who had seen Lord Hamilton meeting with an unknown man the night of the murder, was a breakthrough, but Poirot knew it was only part of the larger mystery. The fact that this meeting had taken place just hours before the murder suggested that Lord Hamilton had been on the verge of uncovering something monumental, something that had cost him his life. But what? Poirot paced slowly around his small office in the drawing room of his temporary quarters, deep in thought. The walls were adorned with elegant tapestries, and the light filtering through the large windows cast soft shadows across the polished floors. Despite the grandeur of his surroundings, his focus was entirely on the case at hand. Who had Lord Hamilton been meeting that night? Poirot's thoughts returned once again to the broken seal, the serpent wrapped around a dagger, enigmatic symbol that had followed him throughout the investigation. What did it mean? He had seen it before, and its connection to the murder was undeniable. The question, however, remained, who else knew about it? Poirot had made no public declarations yet, but he was now certain of one thing: Lord Hamilton's murder had been no random act of violence. It was cold, calculated, and deliberate, and at the center of it all was a secret so dangerous that someone had been willing to kill to protect it. The past comes into focus. Poirot decided that it was time to revisit the Hamilton family history. There were pieces of the puzzle, still missing pieces that could only be found in the shadowed corners of the past. Lord Hamilton had been a man of power, wealth, and influence, but every man of such stature has enemies, and those enemies often leave behind traces, tiny remnants that hold the key to understanding their motives. Poirot's first stop was Lord Hamilton's private library, a massive room filled with leather-bound books and carefully organized papers. The room had been untouched by the police, as they had no reason to suspect that any significant information was hidden here. But Poirot knew better. Lord Hamilton had been a meticulous man, and that meant he had likely kept detailed records of both his public and private affairs. If there was anything that had triggered his obsession with the seal, it would be here. Poirot ran his fingers along the spines of the books, searching for something that stood out. As he scanned the shelves, his eyes were drawn to a small, dusty box on the top shelf. It was an unusual place for it to be, tucked behind a row of financial reports. With a careful hand, Poirot removed the box, dusting off the top before opening it. Inside, he found several old letters, all tied together with a faded ribbon. The letters were addressed to Lord Hamilton, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. They appeared to be personal, and as Poirot read through the first one, he quickly realized that they were written by a woman. The tone of the letters was intimate and urgent. The woman spoke of a family secret, one that had been hidden for generations, and which had come to light once again. The final letter, dated just months before Lord Hamilton's death, contained a shocking revelation. The serpent has returned. It is time to end this. Do not seek him out, Reginald. It will destroy us both. Poirot's breath caught in his throat. The serpent. It was the same symbol, the same warning that had been mentioned in Lord Hamilton's journal. But who was the woman, and what was this secret that she spoke of? The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture was still incomplete. The serpent, the warning, the meeting, it all pointed to something deeper, something far more dangerous than Lord Hamilton's death. There was a conspiracy here, one that stretched back far beyond the murder itself. The hidden past of Lady Isabel. Poirot's next step was to look into Lady Isabel Hamilton's past. She had been the subject of suspicion from the moment he first met her, and her reactions during their interviews had only raised more questions. There was a coldness about her, an aloofness that hinted at secrets buried deep beneath the surface. What was she hiding? Lady Isabel had been married to Lord Hamilton for over a decade, but their relationship was rumored to be less than perfect. Their marriage had always been one of convenience, a union of status and wealth rather than love, and it seemed that Lady Isabel had been more involved in the family's secrets than anyone had realized. Poirot visited the local archives, where he found records that painted a picture of a woman with a troubled past. Before her marriage to Lord Hamilton, Lady Isabel had been engaged to another man, a prominent figure in London society. But the engagement had ended abruptly, with no clear explanation. The records indicated that her former fiancé had disappeared without a trace, and Lady Isabel had been left to pick up the pieces. Yet, there were whispers of a connection between her and the man who had vanished. The more Poirot delved into Lady Isabel's history, the more he uncovered. It seemed that her first fiancé had been involved in shady dealings, and the circumstances of his disappearance were suspiciously similar to the murder of Lord Hamilton. The same serpent symbol had been mentioned in connection with the disappearance. Though no one had ever been able to trace it to a specific source, Poirot could feel the weight of the puzzle pressing down on him. Lady Isabel's connection to the mystery was undeniable. But what was her role in the death of her husband? Was she simply a victim of circumstance, or had she been more involved than anyone realized? Uncovering the truth, the mysterious investigation then took a turn when Eliza, the maid, finally came forward with her testimony. She had seen Lord Hamilton meet with a man outside the estate on the night of the murder. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat, and had a certain air of authority about him. Eliza had been at the window, preparing to retire for the night, when she had noticed the pair. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she had been able to make out a few key details. The man had handed Lord Hamilton a sealed envelope, one that Eliza had not seen before. Poirot felt a rush of excitement. This was it at the moment he had been waiting for. The mystery was finally taking shape. The visitor, the seal, the envelope, it was all connected. Using Eliza's description, Poirot sought out the mysterious man, and with the help of Detective Inspector Blake, he was able to track down Victor Carlyle, the family's longtime friend. who had not been entirely forthcoming in his previous interviews. Carlyle's connection to the Hamilton family was now clear. He had been involved in the events leading up to Lord Hamilton's death, and the envelope he had handed Lord Hamilton contained evidence of a deep conspiracy that stretched back generations. Victor Carlyle was no mere friend of the family. He was the man behind the serpent, the figure who had been manipulating the Hamiltons for years. Lord Hamilton had discovered the truth about Carlyle's hidden agenda, and he had been preparing to expose him. The sealed envelope, the one given to Lord Hamilton the night before the murder, contained the final piece of the puzzle, a set of documents that could have ruined Victor Carlyle's entire operation. A final confrontation. Poirot knew that the time for subtlety had passed. He gathered the suspects in the drawing room, the place where everything had begun. Lady Isabel, John the butler, and Victor Carlyle were all present, their faces a mixture of anxiety, confusion, and disbelief. Poirot's eyes scanned the room, noting the shifting glances and the palpable tension. This was the moment of reckoning. Madame Hamilton, Poirot began, his voice calm yet unwavering. It is clear that you knew more about your husband's death than you have let on. You have hidden truths from me, but today, I will uncover them. And Monsieur Carlyle, he continued, turning to face Victor, your role in this tragedy is far more sinister than I originally suspected. The serpent has been your symbol, your signature, but it has cost Lord Hamilton his life. Victor Carlyle's expression hardened, and for the first time Poirot saw a flicker of fear in the man's eyes. He had been caught, but he wasn't ready to give up. Poirot, you have no idea what you're dealing with, Carlyle spat. You think you've uncovered everything. You haven't even begun to understand the scope of what's at stake. There are far more powerful forces at play than you realize. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes piercing through Carlyle's facade. I understand perfectly well, Monsieur Carlyle. You sought to control the Hamilton family's wealth, their secrets, and their legacy. But it is you who will now face the consequences. Your manipulation has ended. With that, Poirot turned to Lady Isabel. Madame, your role in this is far from innocent. You knew about Victor Carlyle's schemes. You knew he was involved in your first fiancé's disappearance, and yet you chose to protect him. But now, the truth is laid bare for all to see. Lady Isabel's face turned ashen. She had been caught in a web of lies, her carefully constructed facade shattered by Poirot's relentless pursuit of the truth.